In this video we are going to learn how to create tables in HTML, which is very useful when you need to visualize data in a tabular format. If you're very new to HTML, it is recommended that you first watch the HTML introduction video, which is linked from the description of this video. To create a table, we use the table element, which looks like this. All of the table content should be nested within this element. Now let's learn how to create a first simple table. We add rows by using the tr element, which stands for table row. We add header cells with the th element, which stands for table header, by placing it nested inside the table row element. We add data cells by using td element, which stands for table data, by placing it also inside the table row element. For example, here we have a simple table with the name and age headers and 4 data cells describing 2 persons. To create this table, we need to write the HTML code you see here. Note we have a single table element, and nested within it we have 3 table row elements. The first has 2 table header elements, and the other 2 rows have 2 table data elements each. Now that we saw how to create a table with few rows and cells, let's talk a bit about how to customize the borders of the table. By default, borders are not shown, so we'll only see the table data. In order to visualize the borders, we can add a style element inside the add element, like you see here. By setting these properties, we are telling the browser to show black solid borders for our table, but we'll examine each property here in more details in a minute. First, it is important to note that this styling method is called CSS. Let's talk for a minute about CSS. First, don't worry if you are not adequate with CSS at the moment. It is totally possible to experiment with HTML and learn CSS at a later stage. If you'd like to learn more about CSS, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for videos about CSS in this channel. Lastly, before moving back to explore tables in HTML, understand that there are 3 ways to add styling. First is by using a style attribute on each element we want to customize. Second is like we saw before by adding a style element inside the add section. Third is to describe the style on a different file and link it, which we won't cover in this video. Okay, so let's understand more about the styling we added to the simple table before by starting with the border property. When we write 1 pixel solid black, we define the border to look like this line here. The border property is actually a shortcut to customize 3 properties at once. The width, here we defined it as 1 pixel. The border style, here defined as solid. And the color, here defined as black. And we could use just 1 or 2 of these properties instead of using the border property if we wanted. But if we want to edit all 3, then the border property can do so. Here is another example for a border, which is dashed rather than solid, and in yellow color. The other property we used before was border collapse. Let's see what it means. There are 2 possible values for the border collapse property. The one we used, which is called collapse, and one called separate, which is the default value. When using the separate value, the browser will display a different border line for each cell and a different border line for the table. It will look something like this. When using collapse like we did, the browser will collapse the borders on top of each other, creating a table that looks like this, and like we saw earlier. Let's move on to see how to create horizontal headers. Here is a table, for example, where we have vertical headers with person names and horizontal headers with properties about the persons. The HTML code for this will have 3 table row elements, where the first row has an empty cell and 2 table header cells for the person names. The second and third table row elements will also have 3 cells, where the first is a table header element and the other 2 are table data cells. Now let's see how to control the size of columns or rows. The way we customize the size of a row or a column is by using the style properties width and height. Here is a simple table, for example, where we see that the first column is wider than the second, and the second row is larger than the first. The HTML code for this will look like this. Notice how we make the first column wider by adding a style width on the first header cell in the first row, and how we control the height of the second row by using the style height inside the second table row element. We could also specify the width inside the style attribute on the table element, which will instruct the browser to span the table on the percentage of the width of the screen that we want. We could also specify it by pixels instead of percentage if we wanted. Now we are going to see how to control the location of the text within a table cell. By default, the content inside the header cell is centered, and the text inside all other cells is centered vertically, but horizontally is located on the left. Here is a table, for example, where we see 2 ways to control the text location by adding padding or by using text align. The first row shows the default location inside header cells, which is centered. The second row shows the default location for table data cells. The left cell in the third row shows the text a bit to the right from the left border, which we can achieve by adding padding. The right cell on the third row shows the text centered, which we can achieve with text align. Here is how the HTML code would look like. Notice how we don't add style to the first 2 rows, and how we add padding of 5 pixels to the left cell in the third row, and text align center to the right cell on the third row. Another property we often need to control when working with tables is allocating different number of slots to part of the cells. We use call span to specify that a cell should span over multiple columns, and row span to specify that a cell should span over multiple rows. Let's see it in an example. Here is a table with cells numbered between 1 to 7. Notice that cell number 2 spans over 2 columns, and that cell number 5 spans over 2 rows, while all other cells are normal. Here is how it would look like in HTML code. Notice how we specify only 2 table data cells in the first row, because the second one spans over 2 cells. Also notice that in the third row, we also specify just 2 data cells. This is because in the second row, the third cell spans over 2 rows. Sometimes it is more comfortable to style multiple columns together. We can do this with call group. For example, here we have a table with 3 columns, where the first 2 are wider than the third. We can do this by defining a group of the first 2 columns and setting the width. Here is how the code would look like.
Note that a 40% width here means that each column in the group should be 40% width and not the group itself. Note that the call group styling is limited, so it is only possible to customize few properties this way. Another useful one is background color.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.